All right, Trevon. So let's get into our first topic. Joel Embiid made his return from an injury he had back in January. He hurt his meniscus, but he's played in 3 games so far. His first game was against the Oklahoma City Thunder, and he has been dominating since he got back. He hasn't gotten back into basketball shape yet necessarily, but you can just see his effect on the 76ers and how he has brought life back to that team. So my question to you is, what does Embiid's return mean for the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I think it's scary to be honest. And you mentioned the games that he already has played. You mentioned the Thunder, the Heat, and the Grizzlies, and he's been on a tear. They beat all three of those teams. They're all formidable teams. And when you look at the schedule that they have
Except for
left,
the Grizzlies.
except for the Grizzlies, yeah. When you look at what they had left, they had the San Antonio Spurs. That's a nice matchup. They actually played today. We're recording this on Sunday, April 7th. That's a good matchup between him and Wemby, but Philadelphia is obviously a better team. The Pistons and the Magic and the Brooklyn Nets. And you expect him to do pretty much the same thing, being able to sit out. I know he's coming from an injury, but I don't think any of those teams, except for, the matchup against Wemby, can really guard him. And I think also when you look at the standings, like they're in the eighth spot right now. They just beat the Miami Heat. They could beat them in a one game situation, even though I think the Heat are in a playoff situation or probably have proven to us time and time again, like in those high leverage moments that they can come through. But they're only one game back behind the sixth spot. They're only 2.5 games behind the five spot. I really like them in that sixth spot where the Indiana Pacers are. Reason being because the Milwaukee Bucks and the Cleveland Cavaliers are really jousting with each other for those two spots. You do have the Orlando Magic and Knicks only 2 games behind the Bucks, only half a game behind Cleveland. So any of those teams could really, switch things up. But if it stays where it's the Milwaukee Bucks and the Cleveland Cavaliers at the 2 and the 3 spot, and you're the 6th seed, you'll play the third seed in round one, then you'll play the 2 seed in round two. If both of those, Bucks and Cleveland both win their first round matchup, I like the Sixers in both of those matchups, to be honest. I think that it would be a little more tougher against Cleveland Cavaliers just because they have like a Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, but I still don't think they'll be able to really stop Embiid and what he can do. And then against the Milwaukee Bucks, I really do like him against them as well because they've been struggling to figure it out on the defensive end. Sometimes the offense isn't clicking, which is surprising with the two stars that they have. We expected things to be a lot more smoother. Doc Rivers has honestly been off to a bad start. I mean, that could be another discussion for another day. But I like Philadelphia in the spot. If they can get to that sixth spot, I like where they're at. And if they do stay in the play in or get that seventh spot, I think they're good for that too, because then they'll be playing the 2 seed. It'll be pretty much the same situation. So with Embiid and what he's doing, before he came back, I wasn't really too sure about how much it would really matter. But when you look at the standings and how things fall in place, if you win those 2 rounds, and it could possibly be the Bucks in one round and the Cavs in the other round. I like their chances against both teams. And then if you look up, that puts you in the Eastern Conference, which will more than likely be against the best team in the NBA, the Boston Celtics. But we've seen how they can kind of succumb to their shortcomings each year, and anything can happen at that point. Yes, it's a 7 game series. It's not a 1 game win or go home situation. But I still think if with Embiid, if he can play like this, I know that's his Achilles heel is being able to retain and stay at that same level throughout the playoffs. They have a good chance. And I think it all happens because of Embiid. Like without the injuries, if it wasn't for that game requirement and his injury, he was the clear cut MVP. And it wasn't even like a
Yeah.
thing where, years where they just kind of give it a back to back to the same person. He really was the front runner for that reward. And I think he truly deserved it. And he's even coming back from injury playing like an MVP. So I think he changes a lot. Like the whole dynamic of that team changes. From a championship standpoint, I would still like to see the team do a little more changes around him, especially to keep him in Philly. But for this season, I think things can fall really well for the Sixers, and we could probably see them at least in the second round.
Yeah, so for me, what Embiid's return means for the Eastern Conference is that just looking at how things are shaping up in the East outside of the Boston Celtics, I think that the 76ers are the scariest team in the Eastern Conference. And what I mean by that is with Joel Embiid on that 76ers team, he just kind of completes that roster and how it's been constructed. Because I actually think the roster is really good based off of the moves that they made at the trade deadline and who they had coming in from the Harden trade and also Tyrese Maxey coming into his own and how he pairs with Joel Embiid. But Embiid, in those 3 games since he's came back, he's averaged 28.7 rebounds in those 3 games. Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid played for the first time since January in that Miami Heat game. They combined for 66 points that game, and they were just amazing in that pick and roll in the 2-man game. And they just play so well off of each other. I think with Maxey, his ability to get downhill, his speed, his quickness, combined with his ability to shoot off of the screen and roll, or his ability to shoot off of dribble handoffs with Joel Embiid, and then you just mix that with Joel Embiid's dominance, it just makes it really hard to guard them. And then you just have pieces around them like Tobias Harris, Kelly Oubre. Now you added Buddy Hield from that trade earlier this season at the trade deadline with the Indiana Pacers. So you have shooting around those 2 guys. It just seems like they have been able to build this roster in a really good way. The only thing that was missing was Joel Embiid through that stretch where they started taking a nosedive after being, I think, in the second or third spot in the East earlier in the season. Once Joel Embiid went out, it took that nosedive. Now, there are definitely concerns, and I'm not saying that they are going to beat the Boston Celtics. I'm not saying that they are going to make this incredible run. I'm just saying that they are probably like the most interesting and scariest team
Yeah.
when you're going up against them just by Joel Embiid's presence with the players around him. But the concerns I have is obviously the conditioning of Joel Embiid in those 3 games. He seems like he's still trying to get his legs under him and get his,
Sure.
second wind and things like that. In those games, you can see him lagging behind in possessions because he's still trying to get his basketball legs up under him, and then also his health. And those have been things that he has struggled in, especially going into the postseason. So those are the biggest concerns, and they're not something just to brush to the side. But when you look at the other teams in the East and how they stack up against the Boston Celtics, especially with the New York Knicks going through their injury problems, and we'll get into that a little later. Julius Randle is out for the season now. And the Knicks, you remember we did a video earlier about that. The Knicks were our pick to be the biggest threat to the Boston Celtics, which I thought that was the case fully healthy. If you line the Knicks up fully healthy versus the Boston Celtics fully healthy, I think that would have been the best team to challenge the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference. But now that they aren't going to be fully healthy, and you look at the rest of the teams, Joel Embiid coming back, if he can get things rolling going into the postseason, I think that can be one of the more challenging matchups for the Boston Celtics. But that's how I view it with Joel Embiid coming back. They become the scariest team outside of the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, for sure. And pretty much like you said, all this kind of falls within the whole realm of health. Like health is so important in the NBA because your whole idea around the highest potential of these teams is when you have your best players and you have your most key players. And without that, that changes the whole dynamic. And we're seeing that kind of fruition with the Philadelphia 76ers. Like without Embiid, we were not talking about the 76ers in this brand of light as we are now because he just changes so much. And that's the case for a lot of teams. And injuries is something you can't really prepare for, but it's something that you kind of have to deal with. And I do want to give the Philadelphia 76ers credit because when we talked about the Embiid injury initially, I felt like the Sixers would hold the fort down as best as they could to keep them in like a competitive position. They're still above 500. They're still in a good position. They're only 4.5 games out from the 2 spot. That's really good. And they have a chance to get out of the play-in. They're only 1 game out of the play-in, and that's due to them being able to really just do the best that they can to hold the fort down until they get their superstar back. And it could work out. Even if they're in the play-in, I think they can still be in a good position. I think as long as they avoid the Boston Celtics, I think that we could see a lot more of the Philadelphia 76ers in this year's postseason. I think they deserve a lot of credit. Nick Nurse, him being the coach, being able to figure things out. It's good that they had Tyrese Maxey, guys like Kelly Oubre, and all the people they had, Paul Reed, just the backup centers. And I think they've done really well, and it's allowing them to have an opportunity to have possible success in the postseason.
Yeah, most definitely. And to your point, with Embiid in the lineup for the 76ers, they have, I believe it's the second highest win percentage in the league. The Boston
Mhm.
Celtics are the only team that are ahead of them in terms of win percentage. When you have Embiid on that 76ers team, they
Yeah.
become really, really competitive versus
They were number two
with him
before.
without him. Yeah.
Weren't they number
Yep.
two before he got hurt?
Yeah, number 2 or number 3, one of
Number
those.
two, yeah.
And I'll also add this point to it. So if you just look at all of the teams, the Bucks, I believe they're in the second seed right now.
Yeah, Buck
You just
second.
mentioned they're struggling. They just lost 3 games to teams that they had no business losing to. You
Mhm.
look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, they had a really nice run this calendar year. So since January, they had a really good run where they were flowing and going, but
I wasn't a
they've
big fan
started to
though.
die. Yeah, we had our concerns with that team too, and now it's kind of showing. They're still a good team, but it's not to the level that we view the 76ers with Joel Embiid. You look at the Knicks, they're hurt now. And so you just look at those teams that could challenge the Boston Celtics and the 76ers. I believe if Joel Embiid can get his wind up under him a little bit and get his basketball legs going into the playoffs. And you have Maxi and the rest of the crew coming into their own and them kind of figuring things out and having a few games to get their cohesiveness back together. They could be that challenging team against the Boston Celtics for the Eastern Conference. And that's a lot of what ifs, but when you look at how things are stacking up in the East, I just don't see how you can't view the 76ers as a threat with Joel Embiid on the
Yeah.
floor.